I want you to imagine just for a second a political thriller movie.
Oh, I love a good thriller.
Right. So picture this. A sitting president summarily fires his own prime minister. And the twist is they're from the exact same political party.
Okay, dramatic.
And it gets wilder. That single human resources decision basically triggers a rapid-fire succession of failed government replacements, skyrocketing inflation, and eventually brings, of all things, Russian warships into the Gulf of Guinea.
Yeah, it sounds completely made up, like a script Hollywood would reject for being too unrealistic.
Exactly. But it is not a movie script. This is the actual reality on the ground in São Tomé and Príncipe right now, as the island nation barrels toward its critical July 19th, 2026 presidential election.
With a potential runoff already circled on the calendar for August 9th. Yeah.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive today is to unpack a really comprehensive stack of reports on this institutional warfare. We need to understand how a tiny archipelago's internal constitutional dispute basically mutated into this massive geopolitical flashpoint.
Yeah, and it's a textbook case of how fragile the mechanics of a state can actually be. Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. What are the actual stakes for the listener here?
Well, we're looking at a situation where the foundational structures of a government have just completely broken down. This upcoming election isn't a standard political contest about, like, marginal tax rates or healthcare policy.
Right.
It has become a definitive referendum on the rule of law itself and executive overreach. For the citizens living through this, the stakes are entirely existential. They are basically trying to decide if the machinery of the state can even function at all.
Which is terrifying. So to understand the gravity of this July election, we kind of have to look closely at the spark that ignited all this chaos exactly 1.5 years ago.
January 2025.
Yep, January 6th, 2025. President Carlos Vila Nova used Presidential Decree 100 in 2025 to just outright fire his Prime Minister Patrice Trovoada.
Which is a massive deal.
A huge deal. And the structural context here is crucial because São Tomé and Príncipe operates on a semi-presidential system. So in theory, executive power is shared, right, between the president as head of state and the prime minister as head of government.
Yeah, and usually when that system breaks down, it's because the president and the prime minister are from opposing parties, a classic cohabitation clash.
Right, but here they were both from the ruling Independent Democratic Action Party, the ADI.
Yeah. And that intra-party fracture is what makes this so uniquely destabilizing. The semi-presidential framework is designed with pressure valves for inter-party conflict, but it's definitely not built to survive the ruling party just tearing itself apart from the inside out.
It really isn't. So when Vila Nova dropped that decree, he basically bypassed the standard parliamentary process. He didn't wait for a vote of no confidence, and his justification was Trovoada's quote-unquote absenteeism.
Yeah, the absenteeism argument is fascinating.
Right, because, let's play devil's advocate here. I read that Trovoada is this remarkably wealthy individual, and he maintained luxury personal residences across Lisbon, Libreville, Luanda, and Abuja.
He did. He was constantly traveling.
So it kind of reminds me of like an absentee startup founder, the type.
Totally. The guy who's always at conferences.
Exactly. The guy who claims he's always traveling to raise capital or whatever. But meanwhile, the team back home can't get a single document signed.
That's a really good analogy.
Because Trovoada's allies point out that a country of this size desperately needs foreign direct investment. And you don't get that by just sitting at a desk in the capital. You get it by flying to Abuja and Libreville, doing this vital diplomatic matchmaking.
Right, courting the regional heavyweights.
But Vila Nova essentially argued that this was gross negligence. While the prime minister was playing global diplomat, the actual executive branch at home was completely rudderless. Was it actually that bad?
Well, what's fascinating here is that regardless of whether Trovoada's travel was legitimate diplomacy or sheer negligence, the actual mechanism of his dismissal caused this immediate, disastrous institutional domino effect.
Because the floor just fell out from under the executive branch.
Exactly. The ADI party tried to maintain their parliamentary mandate, right?
Yeah.
So they put forward Helio Vaz as a replacement.
And Vila Nova just shot that down immediately.
Instantly. He rejected him, basically assessing that Helio Vaz would just be a puppet for Trovoada.
Which leads to the president deciding to bypass the party machinery entirely. He handpicks his own prime minister, Ilza Amado Vaz. And this results in, honestly, one of the most spectacular 72-hour fiascos I've ever seen in a political report.
Oh, it was a brutal demonstration of how parliamentary math works in reality versus on paper.
What actually happened there?
Well, you can appoint someone to lead a government, sure, but if the very party that holds the legislative majority is in active revolt against that appointment, the executive is just completely powerless.
Right, they can't do anything.
Exactly. Ilse Amado Vaz recognized almost instantly that she had zero legislative support. I mean, absolutely none. She wouldn't be able to pass a single budget line.
So she just quit.
Yeah. Rather than face a guaranteed, humiliating vote of no confidence, she resigned before she even took the oath of office.
Wow. That is an incredibly public collapse of presidential authority.
It really was. And to prevent a total state collapse, they had to settle on this desperate compromise. They appointed Americo Ramos. He was a nominal ADI member who was actually willing to cooperate with the presidency.
But the conflict doesn't end there, does it? Because Trovoada was ousted, sure, but he wasn't powerless. He still controlled the ADI's parliamentary majority.
Right. He had 30 out of 55 National Assembly seats.
Which is a massive chokehold.
No.
So the political battlefield just immediately shifts from the executive branch to the legislature and the courts. Trovoada calls the firing a constitutional coup d'etat, but he smartly avoids calling for, military intervention.
No street protests, no military. He kept the fight entirely within the bounds of the institutions. He basically applied a legal tourniquet.
A legal tourniquet?
Yeah. He didn't blow up the executive branch with civil unrest. He just systematically cut off its blood supply. Using his 30 seats, his faction-blocked presidential decrees, they severely restricted the operational budget. They just bogged down every single administrative process.
But wait, let me push back on that framing for a second. You call it institutional suffocation, but from a purely constitutional standpoint, isn't that just the semi-presidential system working exactly as intended?
How do you mean?
Well, if a president unilaterally fires a prime minister who actually holds a Democratic majority, Parliament is supposed to block the president's overreach, right? That is the textbook definition of checks and balances.
That's a really vital distinction to make. But the line between a check on power and outright state sabotage kind of depends on the outcome. Checks and balances are designed to force a compromise.
And there was no compromise here.
None. What happened here was a total freeze of state functions. And the ADI faction, they knew that just blocking budgets in the assembly wasn't going to be enough. They needed permanent legal validation to completely neutralize the president.
Enter the judicial masterstroke.
Exactly. As vacancies nationally opened up on the Constitutional Court, the TC, in late 2025, Trovoada's faction didn't just appoint standard jurists. They weaponized the judiciary by systematically filling those seats with strict legal scholars. Textualists.
Because if you want to pin a president down, you need judges who interpret the Constitution completely literally. Zero room for expansive executive privilege.
Precisely. And it worked flawlessly for them. In January 2026, so exactly 1 year to the day after Trovoada was ousted, this newly shaped constitutional court ruled that Vila Nova's original dismissal of the government was unconstitutional.
That is wild, a staggering legal victory.
It completely delegitimized the president's actions over the past year.
But here's where it gets really interesting. While these two factions are playing this high level of 3D chess in Parliament and the courts, they both nearly get taken out by a completely mundane administrative technicality.
Oh, the campaign finance hurdle. This is peak political irony.
It really is. Back in 2021, the electoral law required all candidates to submit full campaign expense reports within a strict 90-day deadline. Fast forward to the 2026 race, and it turns out all 19 candidates from that 2021 election had just entirely ignored the deadline.
Yeah, amidst this massive constitutional breakdown where they're debating the limits of executive power, a strict 375,000 Dobra fine was threatening to disqualify the major players for the June 2026 deadline.
Which is what, like 15,000 euros?
Roughly, yeah. So incumbent President Carlos Vila Nova and his prominent challenger Mix Schwalm Bonfim, they both had to desperately scramble in May 2026 just to pay and liquidate these fines to stay on the ballot.
A massive constitutional crisis couldn't remove them, but an unpaid paperwork fine almost did. Unbelievable.
It really shows how fragile the whole system is.
So let's look at that ballot. There are 3 distinct visions competing in this July election. First, you have the incumbent, Carlos Vila Nova. He's running for continuity. But there's a fascinating twist here. Because his own ADI party fractured, he is now officially endorsed by the main opposition party, the MLSTP.
Yeah, after Jorge Bom-Jesus withdrew from the race.
Right. Why would an opposition party back the incumbent they usually fight against?
It's the classic enemy of my enemy dynamic. The MLSTP isn't backing Vila Nova because they suddenly share his ideological vision. They're doing it because their primary historic rival is Trovoada's ADI machine.
Ah, so it's a strategic alliance.
Exactly. By supporting Vila Nova, the MLSTP sees a generational opportunity to keep the ADI permanently fractured and locked out of the executive branch.
Pure pragmatism. Okay, so candidate 2 is Nito da Abreu. He's running as an independent, but he's backed by the ADI. He's essentially the parliamentary leader carrying Trovoada's machinery.
Yeah, and his platform is promising a breakthrough, generational renewal, and a depoliticized judiciary, which, is quite the promise given the court packing we just talked about.
Right. And then the third contender is Mix John Bonfim, another independent, a jurist running an anti-establishment campaign to reprogram the decaying state structure.
He's appealing to voters who are just utterly exhausted by this constant institutional gridlock.
And speaking of the voters, I want to bring this back to you, the listener. If you live in São Tomé right now, you are probably not thinking about the nuance of constitutional court appointments. Your daily life is defined by some pretty grim macroeconomic numbers.
The economic disconnect is severe.
Yeah, we are looking at a projected national GDP growth of just 0.4%, according to a June 2026 IMF report. Inflation is sitting at 9.0%, driven by Middle East conflicts spiking the costs of imported food and fuel.
And that data translates into acute daily suffering. The political elite spent 2025 playing 3D chess, and the ordinary citizens absorbed the devastating economic fallout.
What does that actually look like on the ground?
Well, the government paralysis meant basic state management just evaporated. And the most acute visible symptom of this structural gridlock is the electricity supply crisis. The national grid is experiencing daily, prolonged power outages.
Oh man, that crushes local businesses.
Exactly. If you run a local grocery store, a 12-hour power outage isn't an inconvenience. It's the destruction of your livelihood. The meat in your freezer thaws and spoils. If you're in tourism, your guests leave because there's no AC or internet.
Right. When your daily reality is trying to save your inventory from rotting, promises about a merit-based civil service feel completely useless.
Voters are prioritizing these tangible failures over high-minded reforms. They just want to know who can turn the lights back on.
And because the government was paralyzed, it couldn't afford to modernize that failing power grid, which creates a massive vacuum in state capacity.
And in geopolitics, vacuums always get filled.
Which brings us to the Russian pivot. When a country is paralyzed domestically, it looks outward for lifelines. And São Tomé and Príncipe signed a bombshell military cooperation agreement with Russia.
Yet this is the pivot that has the whole world watching. In exchange for port access, Russia offered drones, radar, and joint naval exercises.
Just right there in the archipelago's massive 160,000 square kilometer maritime territory.
Exactly.
But I have to ask, is this a genuine ideological shift toward Moscow, or is this just a desperate nation leveraging its strategic geography to survive a domestic crisis?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the motive almost doesn't matter to the surrounding regional powers. The sheer physical reality of a Russian footprint is triggering immense regional alarm.
Especially from Angola and Nigeria, right?
Exactly. Angola holds massive diplomatic leverage over the islands. Both Angola and Nigeria view the Gulf of Guinea as the economic aorta of West Africa. It's oil-rich. A Russian naval and drone footprint there is viewed as a highly aggressive disruption.
It's like letting a rival superpower set up a radar dish in your neighbor's front yard.
Yeah, and it connects to a wider fear among West African democratic observers. There's this wave of autocracy sweeping the continent, and the fear is that the political chaos in São Tomé has made it the perfect strategic foothold for authoritarian expansion.
Which explains the massive Western recalibration we're seeing. The EU is deploying an election observation mission to try and preserve democratic integrity. And the U.S. literally issued a Level 3 reconsider travel advisory citing potential election-related unrest.
The international community is bracing for impact because they know this July vote isn't the end of the story.
Right. So what does this all mean? Because of the semi-presidential framework, the ultimate victor isn't actually decided in July.
No. The real power lies in the fall, September 27th, 2026.
The legislative, municipal, and regional elections. Because whoever controls the parliament dictates daily policy.
And executing two massive nationwide elections in under 3 months is an absolute logistical nightmare. It is bleeding the National Electoral Commission, the CEN, completely dry.
They just don't have the funding.
They don't. They rely heavily on Portugal and the UN for funding, for transparent ballot boxes, and for biometric registries to update these disjointed voter rolls. It's an extraordinary strain.
Which sets up a massive constitutional trap, doesn't it?
A huge one. If Nito de Bro's faction, or the opposition, wins a legislative majority in September, they can entirely block Vila Nova, even if he wins re-election in July.
They could just restart the 2025 crisis all over again.
Exactly. They hold the power of the purse. They can resurrect the legal tourniquet strategy and essentially freeze the state on day one.
Wow. So, to summarize this whole journey, we started with a spectacular boardroom-style political firing in January 2025. That triggered an institutional Cold War, weaponized the courts, caused crippling economic stagnation with 9% inflation, and eventually invited a shocking Russian military pivot that dragged in Angola, Nigeria, the EU, and the US.
A lot to take in.
It's a masterclass in how domestic institutional gridlock can turn a peaceful island nation into a total geopolitical battleground.
It really is. And, it leaves us with a pretty heavy question to ponder.
What's that?
Well, when a nation's political stability and even the literal physical execution of its elections, right down to the transparent ballot boxes, are so heavily reliant on foreign powers and international aid, who is actually deciding the future of that democracy?
That is the ultimate question. Who really holds the power? Well, we'll see how things unfold starting July 19th. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Catch you next time.